The moment Marcus Chen's fingers began to dance through the air, 3 pairs of eyes lit up with a joy that hadn't been seen in years. No one expected a maintenance worker to change the lives of the wealthiest family in town, but sometimes heroes arrive in the most unexpected forms. If this story of connection, understanding, and breaking invisible barriers speaks to you, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe, because this journey of transformation is one you won't want to miss. In the towering glass headquarters of Chen Innovations, CEO Victoria Chen commanded respect with every click of her heels against marble floors. At 42, she had built an empire from the ground up, transforming a small tech startup into a Fortune 500 company with offices across 3 continents. Her name graced the covers of business magazines, her strategies were studied in Harvard Business School, and her wealth afforded her a lifestyle most could only dream of. Victoria Chen had everything, except time for her children. The triplets, Sophie, Samuel, and Sarah, had been born 14 years ago during the company's critical expansion phase. Their arrival coincided with Victoria's most ambitious business move, and the diagnosis that followed 3 months later felt like the universe's cruelest joke. All 3 children were profoundly deaf, a rare genetic condition that had skipped generations in Victoria's family. Their father, unable to handle the pressure of raising children with special needs while married to a woman whose career dominated their lives, had walked away when the triplets were barely 2. Victoria, determined not to let anything derail her success, hired the best staff money could buy, a live-in nanny, specialist teachers, and therapists who came and went from their sprawling hillside mansion. What Victoria couldn't buy was connection. Despite the army of caretakers, the triplets grew increasingly isolated. They attended an exclusive private school with an acclaimed program for deaf students, but they kept to themselves, communicating in their own private version of sign language that even their teachers sometimes struggled to understand. At home, they moved through the enormous house like ghosts, rarely seen by their mother who typically returned home after they had gone to bed. The triplets had developed a world of their own, Sophie, the artist, with fingers perpetually stained with paint, Samuel, the builder, who could construct anything from spare parts found around the house, and Sarah, the writer, who filled journals with stories only her siblings could read. They had each other, but to the outside world, they were simply the CEO's deaf kids, curiosities rather than individuals. Connor Reeves had never intended to be a single father. At 36, he had imagined a very different life than the one he now lived. 5 years ago, he had been a successful architect with a growing firm, happily married to his college sweetheart. Then came the accident, a rainy night, a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel, and suddenly, Connor was alone with their 4-year-old daughter, Anzie. Anzie had been in the car too. While she survived, the trauma left her with permanent hearing loss. In the aftermath of grief, Connor had done what any loving father would: he learned sign language, immersed himself in deaf culture, and restructured his entire life around his daughter's needs. The recession hit his architectural firm hard, and clients disappeared. Eventually, Connor made the difficult decision to close the business and find work that would allow him more flexibility to care for Anzie. That's how Connor Reeves, former rising star in architecture, became the new maintenance supervisor at Chen Innovations. The job wasn't glamorous, but it came with good benefits and regular hours. Most importantly, it allowed him to be home when Anzie returned from school. He took pride in keeping the building running smoothly, solving problems before they arose, and treating every task, no matter how small, with the same meticulous attention he once gave to designing skyscrapers. Victoria Chen barely noticed him. To her, he was just another employee, one of hundreds who kept her corporate machine running. She had no idea that this man in work clothes, who fixed leaking pipes and replaced fluorescent bulbs, would become the key to unlocking her children's world. The intersection of their lives came on a rainy Thursday in November, the kind of day when the sky hangs low and the world seems wrapped in gray. It was Take Your Child to Work Day at Chen Innovations, an event Victoria had implemented years ago as part of the company's family-friendly image campaign. Usually, she arranged for her assistant to show the triplets around while she attended meetings. This year, however, her assistant was on maternity leave, and the replacement had called in sick. With no other option, Victoria reluctantly brought the triplets to her office suite and instructed her secretary to keep an eye on them while she attended an emergency board meeting. Sophie, Samuel, and Sarah sat quietly in the waiting area, watching employees walk by with their hearing children who pointed and stared at the triplets signing hands. Connor had brought Anzie to work as well. At 9 years old, she was curious and outgoing, despite her hearing loss. When she spotted the 3 teenagers sitting alone while other children were being led on tours, she tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed. "Who are they, Dad?" she signed. Connor looked up from the electrical panel he was checking. "Those are Ms. Chen's children," he replied, his fingers forming the words with practiced ease. Anzie's eyes widened. "The big boss? Why are they alone?" Connor hesitated, not wanting to speak ill of his employer. "I'm sure someone will be with them soon," he signed back. But an hour passed, and the triplets remained in the waiting area, increasingly uncomfortable as more employees and their children filtered through. Connor watched as they huddled closer together, their hands moving in rapid conversation that seemed more agitated by the minute. "They're like me," Anzie signed suddenly. "They can't hear." Connor looked more carefully and noticed the subtle signs he'd grown accustomed to recognizing, the way they were visually alert, how they oriented their bodies toward each other to communicate, the absence of reaction to sudden noises in the busy office. "I think you're right," he signed to Anzie. "Should we say hello?" Anzie nodded eagerly, and Connor felt a moment of hesitation. He was just the maintenance supervisor, and these were the CEO's children. But looking at their isolated expressions, he remembered how Anzie had felt before finding friends in the deaf community, the loneliness that no amount of expensive therapy could address. Connor approached with Anzie, kneeling down to be at eye level with the seated teenagers. "Hello," he signed clearly. "I'm Connor, and this is my daughter, Anzie. She noticed you might use sign language too." The triplets stared in shock. In the Chen Innovations building, no one had ever approached them using sign language. Sophie was the first to respond, her hands moving cautiously as if afraid this might be some kind of joke. "You sign?" she asked. Connor nodded and smiled. "My daughter is deaf. I learned for her." Samuel leaned forward, suddenly animated. "Everyone here just talks at us," he signed rapidly. "They don't even try." Sarah, the quietest of the 3, simply watched with wide eyes, taking in the unexpected connection. Connor felt a pang in his chest. These kids were surrounded by hundreds of people every day at school and at home, yet they were profoundly alone. "Would you like to join us? I'm supposed to be showing Anzie around the maintenance areas, not as exciting as the executive floors, but there are some cool things to see." The transformation was immediate. 3 faces lit up with relief and excitement, and soon the triplets were following Connor and Anzie through the building's behind-the-scenes areas. Connor showed them the massive HVAC system, explaining in sign language how it kept the building comfortable. He demonstrated how the backup generators worked and let Samuel, with his natural mechanical aptitude, help test the emergency lighting system. For the first time in the Chen Innovations building, the triplets weren't being treated as accessories to their mother's corporate image, they were being seen as the bright, curious individuals they were. Connor asked them questions and waited for their answers. He laughed at their jokes and complimented their insights. Most importantly, he spoke their language, both literally and figuratively. By lunchtime, an unbreakable bond had formed. When Victoria's secretary finally came looking for the triplets, she found them in the maintenance workshop, helping Connor and Anzie build a small wind turbine from spare parts. The triplets' hands were moving rapidly, their faces animated with joy as they discussed the project. "Ms. Chen has been looking for you," the secretary announced awkwardly, not knowing how to communicate with the teenagers. Connor thanked her and explained the situation to the triplets. The light faded from their eyes as they realized their brief adventure was over. Before they left, Sarah, who had barely communicated all morning, reached out and touched Connor's arm. "Thank you," she signed simply, her expression saying what her hands couldn't fully convey. That evening, as Victoria Chen reviewed reports in her home office, she noticed something unusual: laughter. Following the sound, she found the triplets in Samuel's room, attempting to recreate the wind turbine they had built earlier. They were so engrossed in their project that they didn't notice her standing in the doorway, watching their animated signing with confusion. Over dinner, Victoria tried to engage with them as she always did, speaking slowly so they could read her lips, keeping her questions simple enough for written responses. But tonight, the triplets weren't cooperating with their usual passive acceptance. Instead, Sophie pulled out her phone and typed a message, showing it to her siblings before passing it to her mother. "We met someone who actually talks to us today," the message read. "A man who works in your building. He knows sign language. His daughter is deaf too." Victoria frowned. Who was this person? "Connor from maintenance," Samuel wrote on his own phone. "He didn't treat us like we're broken." The word struck Victoria like a physical blow. She had provided her children with every advantage money could buy: the best schools, the best therapists, cutting-edge hearing aids they refused to wear. Yet here they were, telling her that a maintenance worker had connected with them in a way she never had. "Would you like to learn sign language, Mom?" Sarah wrote, her expression hopeful yet guarded, as if expecting rejection. Victoria looked at her children, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in years. They were teenagers now, no longer the toddlers she remembered whenever she thought about their diagnosis. They had grown into their own personalities, developed their own interests, all while she was building her empire. "Yes," she said, making sure to face them directly so they could read her lips. "I would like that very much." The next morning, Victoria Chen did something unprecedented. She cleared her schedule for the day and went looking for Connor Reeves. She found him in the basement, repairing a backup generator. When he stood to greet her, his expression was wary. No doubt he thought he was in trouble for interacting with her children. "Mr. Reeves," Victoria began, feeling strangely nervous. "I understand you spent some time with my children yesterday." Connor nodded. "Yes, Ms. Chen. I hope that was all right. They seemed lonely, and my daughter wanted to say hello since she's deaf too." Victoria took a deep breath. "Mr. Reeves, I've come to ask for your help. My children, they want me to learn sign language. They've had instructors before, but..." She paused, struggling to find the words. "They've never been this excited about someone who signs." Connor's wariness transformed into surprise. "You want me to teach you sign language?" "If you're willing," Victoria replied. "I can compensate you for your time, of course." Connor considered the request. "Ms. Chen, I'm not a certified instructor. But I'd be happy to help you learn to communicate with your kids." He hesitated before adding, "though I think they might be the best teachers for you." And so began an unlikely partnership. 3 times a week, Connor and Anzi would join the Chen family for dinner, where the focus was not on Victoria's business accomplishments but on learning a new language. The triplets, initially skeptical of their mother's commitment, gradually opened up as they saw her struggling through signs, making mistakes, and persevering despite her frustration. For Victoria, it was humbling. She, who mastered complex business negotiations and intimidated corporate boards, found herself struggling to form basic sentences with her hands. But each time she successfully communicated something to her children without writing or lip reading, the joy on their faces made the effort worthwhile. Connor was a patient teacher. He understood not just the mechanics of sign language but the cultural aspects as well, the importance of eye contact, facial expressions, and the visual poetry that made ASL a rich, complex language rather than just a set of gestures. "Sign language isn't just English on your hands," he explained one evening. "It's its own language, with its own grammar and idioms. When you learn it, you're not just learning to communicate differently, you're learning to think differently." For the triplets, watching their mother stumble through signs was both amusing and deeply moving. For the first time, she was making herself vulnerable for them, stepping into their world instead of expecting them to navigate hers. As weeks turned into months, changes rippled through both families. Victoria began adjusting her schedule, leaving the office earlier to be home for their evening lessons. The triplets started coming to Chin Innovations after school, spending time with Anzi in a small break room that Connor had converted into a teen-friendly space with the company's blessing. Word spread through the company about the CEO's new focus on her family. Employees who had previously avoided the deaf kids now made efforts to learn basic signs. Human Resources implemented an optional sign language course for staff members. The corporate culture, once solely focused on performance and profit, began to shift subtly toward inclusivity. But not everyone embraced the changes. Victoria's board of directors grew concerned about her reduced hours and newfound interest in what they considered a personal matter. Richard Blackwood, the ambitious CFO who had long coveted Victoria's position, began gathering allies, suggesting that Victoria was losing her edge. "I'm concerned about Victoria's focus," he told board members in private conversations. Chin Innovations needs a CEO who is 100% committed to the company's growth, not distracted by family drama. The whispers reached Victoria, who found herself at a crossroads she never expected. For the first time in her career, her personal life and professional ambitions were in direct conflict. The international expansion she had planned would require months of travel and around-the-clock work, exactly the kind of schedule that had distanced her from her children in the first place. Meanwhile, Connor faced his own challenges. Some of his co-workers resented his special relationship with the CEO, assuming he was using the situation to advance his career. His supervisor loaded him with additional responsibilities, often scheduling him for maintenance tasks during the times he had arranged to meet with the Chin family. Anzi, however, was thriving. Having found friends in the triplets, she blossomed from a shy child into a confident young girl who moved fluidly between the hearing and deaf worlds. She took pride in helping the triplets teach their mother, often demonstrating signs with a child's natural clarity that adult instructors lacked. 6 months into their arrangement, crisis struck. Victoria was called away to handle an emergency with their Asian operations, a trip that would take at least 3 weeks. The night before her departure, she sat with the triplets, explaining the situation in the sign language she had worked so hard to learn. "I have to go," she signed, her movements more fluid now after months of practice. "The company needs me there." The triplets exchanged glances loaded with history. They'd heard variations of this explanation their entire lives. "We understand," Sophie signed back, her expression carefully neutral. "Work is important." Victoria recognized the resignation in their response, the practiced acceptance of her absence. It was a look she had seen countless times before but had never fully registered until now. "While I'm gone," she continued, "would you like Connor and Anzi to stay here? So you can continue your lessons?" The suggestion was unprecedented. Victoria had never before allowed non-staff members to stay in their home while she was away. The triplets' surprise quickly gave way to enthusiasm, and arrangements were made for Connor and Anzi to move into the guest house on the Chin estate during Victoria's absence. What Victoria couldn't know was that Richard Blackwood saw her departure as the perfect opportunity to implement his plan. The day after she left, he called an emergency board meeting to discuss leadership concerns, presenting evidence that Chin Innovations was losing market share due to Victoria's divided attention. "We need to make a decision for the good of the company," he told the gathered board members. "Victoria has been an exceptional leader, but her priorities have clearly shifted. Perhaps it's time we considered a transition in leadership." The board was split, with long-time members loyal to Victoria resisting the suggestion while newer members seemed receptive to Blackwood's arguments. They agreed to continue the discussion and potentially vote on the matter before Victoria's return. Back at the Chin estate, Connor and Anzi settled into a comfortable routine with the triplets. Without Victoria's presence, the teenagers opened up even more, sharing their frustrations and hopes with Connor in lengthy signed conversations that would have been impossible months earlier. "She's trying now," Samuel signed one evening as they sat around the kitchen island. "But what happens when she gets bored of learning sign language? She always goes back to work." Connor considered his response carefully. "Your mother is a complicated person," he signed. "But I've never seen someone work as hard at learning to communicate as she has these past months. That means something." Sarah, who had grown increasingly expressive, signed with uncharacteristic animation. "She doesn't know who we really are. She knows the versions of us from 5 years ago." This insight struck Connor deeply. He realized that Victoria was trying to reconnect with children who existed in her memory, not the teenagers they had become. An idea began to form, a way to help Victoria truly see her children as they were now. "What if we show her?" he suggested. "What if we create something that helps her understand who you've become?" The idea evolved into a project that consumed their evenings. The triplets decided to create a documentary about their lives, not as the CEO's deaf triplets, but as Sophie, Samuel, and Sarah Chin, 3 individuals with distinct personalities, talents, and dreams. They interviewed each other, recorded their daily activities, and created artwork expressing their experiences. Connor helped with the technical aspects, but the content came entirely from the triplets. Sophie painted visual representations of what music felt like to her through vibrations. Samuel demonstrated the adaptive technology he had designed for their home. Sarah shared poems she had written about growing up deaf in a hearing family. Most powerfully, they recorded a signed conversation about their mother, their early memories of her, their feelings about her absences, and their complex emotions about her recent efforts to learn sign language. The raw honesty of their discussion would have been impossible months earlier, before Connor had shown them that their voices, though silent to the hearing world, deserved to be expressed and heard. While the project progressed, Victoria was struggling in Singapore. The operational issues were more complicated than anticipated, requiring her to extend her trip. Worse, she was receiving disturbing reports from allies on the board about Blackwood's machinations. For the first time in her career, she faced the real possibility of losing control of her company. In the past, she would have thrown herself completely into the fight, working around the clock to outmaneuver her opponents. Now, however, she found herself distracted, checking her phone for video messages from the triplets and practicing sign language in her hotel room late at night so she wouldn't lose her hard-won skills. During a particularly tense video conference with her executive team, Victoria noticed Blackwood smiling smugly as she struggled to focus on the financial projections. Something in his expression, the satisfaction of a predator sensing weakness, crystallized a realization that had been forming for weeks. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced suddenly. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning." Ignoring the surprised protests, Victoria ended the call and sat alone in her hotel suite, facing a truth she had been avoiding. She had built Chen Innovations to create security for her family, but somewhere along the way, the company had become the purpose rather than the means. Victoria made 3 calls that night. The first